into this bit on food chains. Now, you probably studied these a little bit in primary school, so we're just going to run through them, make sure we're comfortable with what the structure of a food chain is. A food chain shows the way that energy is flowing throughout a system or throughout one particular chain as things get consumed. So you can see here at the front of my chain, I have a lettuce, and then you can see an arrow pointing towards the fly. So we're saying the lettuce is eaten by the fly, and there's an arrow pointing this way. And the reason it's pointing from the producer to the primary consumer is because that is where the energy is starting from, and that is where the energy is going. So a food chain shows us the path of the energy. But where did the lettuce get its energy from? So hopefully we're thinking back and we're going, oh, that's right, it's a plant, so therefore it's autotrophic. It makes its own energy from sunlight via the process called photosynthesis. So let's go for a little bit more complex food chain here. Now we've got 3 levels to this one. Food chains always start with a producer. So for example, in this case, we've got the lettuce again, but this time the lettuce is eaten by the slug. That slug is our primary consumer, and that slug is then going to be eaten by this bird here. So that is our secondary consumer. So here we have a herbivore because it's eating the plant, and a carnivore because it's eating another animal. This could also be called, the slug could also be called a primary consumer, the first consumer, and the bird could be called a secondary consumer. Let's have a look. What have the arrows got to do with anything, and which way do they point? Well, the arrows are always pointing in the direction that the energy is traveling. So for example, in this food chain up here, you can see the energy in the lettuce, which it got from the sun by photosynthesis, goes into the slug, and then that energy from the slug goes into the frog when the frog eats it, and then the energy in the frog goes into the stork when the stork eats it. And that's shown by the fact that the arrows are pointing that way. So it doesn't matter in particular which direction they are pointing. So they can point up, they can point sideways, they can point at an angle over here, but it is important which end the arrow head is on. So here, for example, you've got a carrot. The carrot is part of a plant, so it's a producer. Then it goes into a rabbit, and the rabbit is your primary consumer. And then that goes into a fox. So therefore, we've got more consumption going on here. And this is our secondary consumer here. But it doesn't matter that this is reversed to this one, because the arrowheads are showing me the direction that the energy is traveling. So every food chain is going to describe only one set of feeding relationships. And different environments are going to have different food chains. So you can see here on the left, you've got a terrestrial food chain, terrestrial meaning on land. So you've got a plant eaten by a locust by the looks of it, which is then eaten by a small rodent, eaten by a snake, and then eaten by a hawk. So that is a land-based or a terrestrial food chain. And then on this side, we've got these phytoplankton, which are like plants that float around in the sea. They're a bit different to a traditional plant, but they are producers. Then they're eaten by another form of plankton called zooplankton. Then they're eaten by small fish. The small fish are eaten by big fish, and the big fish are eventually eaten by a killer whale. So that one there is a marine food chain. So different environments, depending whether they're on the land, in the desert, in a rainforest, all of those have different food chains. But what's going to happen to all of the material when this carnivore, this top-level quaternary consumer, what's going to happen when it dies? So when the birds die, when that hawk dies, or that killer whale dies, what's going to happen to it? So this is where these guys come into play. These are called decomposers. So decomposers can't return the energy to the beginning of the food chain because the plants or the producers always get their energy from somewhere else. But what they do return is all the other stuff that you need, because you don't just need sugar or energy in the form of sugar. You need different nutrients, you need different minerals. So by using a decomposer, the decomposer, which can be fungi or bacteria, they break down the dead material and return the nutrients to the soil for use by all the other animals or all the other plants that are there. You kind of already knew this was coming because we talked about the kingdom fungi being saprophytes, which means that they feed on dead materials. All right, so everyone plays a role within an ecosystem. Decomposers, their role is not to replace energy because that can be done by the sun. Back here at the beginning, the new producers over here will absorb the energy from the sun. But what their job to do is to return these nutrients back to the beginning of the food chain so that the whole process can start again. All right. The other thing I'm going to talk to you about, this is probably the hardest concept, is the concept of energy flow through the food chain. So we've talked about energy passing through each level, but what do you notice here? We can see down the bottom is our producers, and there's heaps and heaps and heaps of grass there. Yeah, and then you've got, what have we got? 9 rabbits. And then after 9 rabbits, so they're your primary consumers, then you get your secondary consumers or your snakes, and that's going to be your next level. There's only 3 of those. And then for every 3 snakes, they're only going to feed 1 hawk. So why do those numbers go down? Some of you might be thinking, oh, it's because the animal is bigger. And yes, there is a part of that. So it's going to take more. But also energy gets lost throughout this food chain. So not all of the energy in the grass is going to go into growing rabbits. Some of that energy might be used to help the rabbits hop away. Some of the energy might be used to help them just digest their own food. Some of the energy goes out the back end when they do a poo. So all of these things, all of these energy losses mean that we can't sustain as many organisms as we go up the food chain. The most important thing to understand is that ecosystems don't exist on solitary food chains. There's not just one thing that the lettuce is eaten by and then one thing that's eaten by. What it is, it's a big complex of food chains, and these are called food webs. Kind of like a spider's web. They're food chains that overlap each other all the way up to the top. So for example, you can see here in the wild, animals don't usually eat one thing. They eat more than one thing. Here's a poster advertising the fact that feral cats in Australia eat 400 different species. Now, I'm not suggesting that every animal or every living thing eats or consumes 400 different species, but this is just an example of the fact that the feral cat is therefore going to belong to many different food chains. It consumes birds, it consumes reptiles, it consumes frogs, it consumes rodents, which are like rats and mice, and it also consumes marsupials. So really important to keep in mind that not every organism only has one food source. So let's think about a food web here. So let's start with the first one, and I'm going to start with that being pink. So you can see the flowers are down here, and they're going to be consumed by the rabbit, and then that's going to be consumed by the hawk. So that's one food chain. And when I'm drawing it, I tend to always draw my producers down the bottom. Then I've got my primary consumers in the middle or on the next level. Then I've got my secondary or tertiary. I'm not doing a great job of this. Tertiary consumers up here. Tertiary consumers. Woo! This is my excellent, I can write with a mouse. So there are the producers are down the bottom, the primary consumers in the middle, and the secondary or tertiary consumers at the top. So that's just one food chain. Let's draw the next food chain in. So this time we're going to start with the grass. The grass is going to be consumed by the mouse. The mouse is going to be consumed by a snake. But now the snake is being consumed by the hawk. So you can straight away see that the hawk itself has, in this food web, it has 2 different food sources. Let's try another one. So I'm going to add them one chain at a time, starting from the bottom, drawing up. So you can see this time I'm going to say flowers down the bottom. They're going to be consumed by a rabbit again. So I don't need to draw 2 arrows, but for just to show you that this is where that food chain is, I am. Now, rabbits are not only eaten by hawks, but they're also eaten by snakes. And then that snake is going to be eaten by a hawk too. So you can start to see that these chains are filling up on the way through here. Now the final one, and I know it's a bit annoying, I have to use this colour, it's a bit fatter. This time we've got the grass being consumed by the mouse. I need to put my arrow in. And that mouse is straight away consumed by the hawk. So you can see that hawk has got rabbits, snakes, and mice all as its food source. So the last bit asks, can we find any more food chains in this food web? So let's have a look. Oh, there's some gaps here. So I've got one where the wildflowers are consumed by the mouse is consumed by the snake, and the snake is consumed by the hawk. So that's one. I've also got another one here in pale blue. This would be the grass is consumed by the rabbit, and the rabbit is consumed by the hawk. But there are a bunch of different interactions here. And so food webs show infinite numbers of food chains. So we got 6 food chains in this one food web just now. You can get really, really complex webs. So these guys down here, these are called your phytoplankton. This is what I was telling you about before. This is an Antarctic food web. So those phytoplankton can be eaten by krill. Okay, once they're eaten by the krill could get eaten by this fish. This fish could be eaten by this elephant seal. And this elephant seal could be eaten by this killer whale. And that would be my food chain, that blue food chain. Phytoplankton goes to krill, so arrow to krill, arrow towards fish, arrow towards elephant seal, arrow towards smaller toothed whales. In addition, let's start off one more. So this time I'm going phytoplankton to herbivorous zooplankton. This time the zooplankton might get eaten by other carnivorous zooplankton. Then they're going to be eaten by other birds. Those other birds can be eaten by a leopard seal, and that leopard seal can be eaten by my orca as well. So you can draw along any one of these pathways so long as you follow the direction of the arrows and find out those different food chains. So your activity, your last little mini assessment for this unit, is to draw a food web using the following information. Kangaroos and mice eat native grasses. Cockatoos and termites eat wattle trees, so on and so forth. So you've got to think about them from the bottom. So we've got kangaroos and mice eat native grasses. So I would say that these guys, these native grasses, are producers. Where do we put the producers? At the bottom. So this is the native grasses. And then there would be an arrow up into mice. And an arrow up into kangaroos. Okay, and then you're going to add in each statement. So cockatoos and termites eat wattle trees. So we haven't done wattle trees, so we might start them over here. Okay, so you're just going to add each food chain one at a time and create a food web. And then after you've done that, and you can pop into Zoom and check with your teacher at any time, pop in, and then you've got to answer these 6 questions. And when you've done all that, you take a photo and you submit that to Sector, and then you're done for the last little one of our tasks. When you've finished all that, it's time to get on revising. And you've got to make sure that you know all of this and all of the words. So start playing the Quizlet if you haven't already. Start rewatching the videos. Have a look over your notes. Have a look over the PowerPoints. And you should be able to find all the information that you need to be successful for your test. Good luck!